on my attention. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 1 of 200, the Media and Politics podcast. We've got another midweek episode for you this evening. I'm joined by a whole range of guests who have been involved with Aotearoa for Palestine to talk about the incredibly successful pro-Palestine march that happened on the weekend here in Tamaki Makaurau. We've got Arama, Bianca, Omar, and Nadine. But I'll hand over to you first, Arama, just to give a quick intro, and then we'll just do a quick round the room so people can say who they are, where they're from, and give our audience an idea about how everyone's been connected to this mahi.
Kia ora, thanks Kyle. It's lovely to be on 1 of 200 again. I was going to just steal the keys and do the show, but I'm glad that you've agreed to come and host it today. I just really wanted to do a show that was like a victory lap of the amazing success of the weekend. I think a lot of us are still like trying to process it. Like, did that really just happen? Because it was just so incredible. As you know, the March for Humanity was supposed to be a march across the Auckland Harbour Bridge, but at the last minute we had to change plans and go through the Auckland CBD. I think some of us were maybe a little nervous that people might not want to turn up for just a normal march through the CBD, but I remember, just heading to the march and hoping lots of people would be there. And then as I approached, just it sounded like a football stadium, and I could just tell it was bigger than any march I'd been to in Auckland. And at that point, I start running like an auntie to try and get there because it was just so exciting. And yeah, I think we were all buzzing. It was a really powerful day. So I wanted to take this time to talk about just what it was that we experienced and the impact that this will continue to have for the movement, really, given everything that's happening and still happening, particularly with in Gaza City. There's just atrocities happening there day in and day out, and just worsening conditions. And so throughout the past 2 years, there's just been so few moments that have really been glimmers of hope in an otherwise very bleak world. And so when we do have moments like this, I think it's really important to shine a spotlight on them. So I'm Arama, I'm from Aotearoa for Palestine and also Kaiāwhina, and I'll hand over to Nadine, who is our spokesperson.
Kia ora, ko Nadine taku ingoa, and I'm also part of Aotearoa for Palestine, originally from Gaza, Palestine, and I got involved in the protest 2 years ago, chanting my heart out. And then I got involved with the lovely Aotearoa for Palestine group. We are a group of Palestinians and Māori individuals that have come together for the March for Humanity, and we will keep going until Aotearoa, the government in Aotearoa, sanctions Israel for its war crimes. Kia ora.
Kia ora, my name is Omar. I am originally from Gaza, born here in New Zealand, and lived overseas for a bit and came back to Aotearoa after a while. And when I came back, I realized that people don't know much about Palestine, and that's when I joined different groups that advocate for Palestinians and try to promote our culture, or we raise awareness through sharing our culture and teaching people about the culture. And then when the events in Gaza started, we kind of shifted focus because that was the primary focus at the time. And yeah, after 2 years, we got together for this Aotearoa for Palestine, and we thought it was a good idea and decided to go with it because we really must do what we can and everything we can to help our whānau back in Gaza. I hand over to Bianca.
Tēnā tātou katoa, he uri tēnei o ngā puhi nui tonu ko Ngāti Kahu ki Whangaroa te Hapu, ko Bianca Ranson, tōku ingoa, kia ora everybody. Thank you for having us on your podcast. It's a real honour to be here. I am also part of Aotearoa for Palestine, and I am a lead with a community self-defence and care group called Kaiāwhina. We are a group of activists and organisers that came together at the very first Palestine protest after the 7th of October 2023 and have been on the ground for 102 consecutive weeks supporting Palestine rallies and marches in Tamaki Makaurau and de-escalating with Destiny Church and other Zionists or far-right actors that come into our space to create harm and look out for our communities, our tamariki, our kaumātua, and are always honoured to serve and take care of our Palestinian communities. And we did the marshalling for the massive March for Humanity that just happened on Saturday, where, yeah, we believe that there was at least 50,000 people that turned up in the Auckland CBD after seeing that massive drone footage. So, yeah, an honour to be here. Thank you.
Well, this is a really nice opportunity for us because we've been so busy that we actually haven't come together to kind of debrief about the march. So maybe we could just start by sharing any highlights that we had on the day.
I might start actually. So I still remember while we were marching through Queen Street and then Custom Street, every couple of minutes I'll check my phone and I'll get a message from a friend saying we're still in Aotea Square, we're still in Aotea Square. And the moment we reached Victoria Park, like I was like, unbelievable, they're still in Aotea Square. Like they were the last people to leave probably with their block. And it was amazing. Like every person that was looking me in the eyes, I was like, they're still in Aotea Square. I was shouting it to like everyone, like a big announcement. It was like it's massive. Like it just realizing how big it was scary in a way of how big it really ended up being. That's probably the highlight for me, just the announcements.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
agree. I think realizing how big it was, because as we were approaching Victoria Park, one of our Kaiāwhina was also saying, she made an announcement that people were still leaving Aotea Square. And when she said that, like I literally felt goosebumps. Like I was like we are so far away from Aotea Square. And also approaching Victoria Park and hearing, Palestinian music as we were like approaching as well. Like, because I've never heard Palestinian music like that before, and like, a big scale. And it really felt like a revolution, when we say like there is only one solution, revolution, like that to me felt like a revolution. Like we are making history as we're walking down these streets, and also seeing a lot of familiar faces, people that I haven't seen in a while that have been coming to the protest, and that's fine, but I think a lot of people, like, this was the protest that they came to. This was their first protest that they came to. So yeah, just seeing a lot of familiar faces, like my colleagues and friends, which was one of the highlights for me.
Yeah, I support what Nadine and Omar have both said. I guess for the space that I was in for the organizing as Kaiāwhina was very much focused on the safety and well-being of people getting over the harbour bridge, and it was 15 hours between when we had to decide to change the route from the harbour bridge to going through the central city, which was a really short turnaround and really short amount of time to let everybody know. And so it was just completely overwhelming. From 8:30 a.m., Aotea Square was packed, and then it just started to fill up more, and then it went out onto Queen Street, and then it was going up Queen Street. And so there were a few highlights for me. One of them was looking around and seeing the Palestinian young people, little Ali, Nadine, Tasneem, Rahaf, Omar, so many of them that have been on the ground for the past 2 years. And I've seen the crowd fluctuate from between 10,000 people down to a couple of hundred people over the last 102 weeks. And to see tens of thousands of Aucklanders and New Zealanders that had traveled from afar turn up in support of Palestine, calling for an end to the genocide and for our New Zealand government to sanction Israel for its war crimes, was just incredible to see. For me, it felt like my hope was that it provided some reassurance and some recognition that what is happening is being seen by our country and by our people, because it hasn't felt like that for a long time. The other highlight was how we as Kaiāwhina dealt with Destiny Church, who are just continuously creating harm, and we had done a lot of preparation for, yeah, just obstructing any of their hate or their harm being directed to us with banners that were custom designed for them. And the other highlight was certainly getting to Victoria Park and realizing that the Kaiāwhina at the back of the march hadn't left Aotea Square, and it's 2.1 kilometers between those two places and knowing just how packed the street was. Like in some places it's 6 lanes wide, and that we got all of those tens of thousands of people safely to Victoria Park with no major incidents was incredible. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember I had Reuters on the phone. They were calling to find out how big the crowd size was, and they always have their own agenda. So they were wanting to know about like how many arrests and things like that also. But I run over to one of the former Greenpeace, or maybe he still works there, Simon, our mate, who's very experienced. And I was like, Simon, what's the crowd size? And he does the maths. He's like, Queen Street fits 15,000 people, so from there we like map out what that actually equates to. Police, I think, struggle. I don't know what the entry requirements are to get in the New Zealand police, but I don't think there's any numeracy tests because 20,000 people, like we've seen what a 20,000 people march was. That was the number who did the March for Humanity. Oh, sorry, the March for Nature. And that was only the length of Queen Street. And so this one was more than twice that. So but I managed to get the $50,000 person size in the international media, so we do see that figure reflected there. But yeah, it was such a high, but we already were seeing kind of the media kind of sweep it under the rug and try to present photos where only small sections of the crowd can appear and things. So that's a little frustrating, and we're still, kind of fighting that narrative war, and that will go on. But yeah, certainly the day itself was brilliant, and Bianca shared with me stories about 80-year-olds who'd never been to a protest before who, despite recent hip replacements and things, made it out for the March for Humanity. So it really did feel like the tide has shifted, and it's now just a popular and irresistible cause to stop this genocide that's happening. I wanted to ask Omar and Nadine, though, like, obviously it was a powerful and amazing moment for everybody who stands with Palestinians, but I wondered if there was anything you wanted to share about what this meant for the Palestinian community.
I think, seeing the support from everyone, was absolutely incredible. And as Ahmed mentioned in his intro, a lot of people didn't really know what Palestine was before this, everything. So I think people are learning now, and people are also unlearning things that they were taught. So I think seeing the support and the solidarity from everyone, from Tangata Whenua, from Muslim groups, from Christians groups, Jewish groups, like just a very diverse community of people have come and have shown their support. So I think the tide is shifting and people are showing their support. And I think, yeah, having the backing of Tangata Whenua was a big honor for us Palestinians. And even just to be considered to march on the Harbour Bridge was a massive honor in itself. It's unfortunate that we didn't do it, but even just to be considered to march on the Harbour Bridge for Palestine was a massive honor for us. Yeah, that's just my 2 cents on it.
Oh, it was definitely our honor to stand with you.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, we Indigenous people, especially, Maori and Palestinians, we went through the same thing, right? Well, similar. But yeah, it's great to see the tide shifting now and people coming and supporting and showing their support in the masses as well. And just having, more than 150 organizations endorse this march as well showed us like these are the people that stand with us. So now it's time for the government to do something about it, because the people in Aotearoa have spoken, the people have come from Wellington, Christchurch, Hamilton, and now it's time for our government to listen to the people, because the people demand action. Words are not enough now. The people demand sanctions on Israel.
Yeah, you mentioned all of the support from different organizations across the country. I think that was something that was really special and significant about the march, and also part of what led to there being such an amazing turnout on the day. So Omar, I wondered if you might share with us how we managed to get that huge amount of endorsements in a matter of a couple of weeks.
Well, to be honest, when you work with Mana Whenua, things becomes much easier for you. And I think like that in addition to the fact that our cause is righteous and everyone's seeing what's happening in Gaza, like if you didn't agree with Palestinians 2 years ago, now you agree, and that like we can disagree on a lot of things, but I think we can all just agree that killing children is a crime, starving people is a war crime. it's not okay. And this is like probably the main thing, that by starting to agree on or finding the points that we agree on, and that this is a human rights issue, it's not about religion or ethnicity, and seeing how we all agree on the same principles like love and peace for everyone, and then we start from there. And I think that's like one of the main things that really helped us, that
Mhm.
knowing that we stand on we have similar values, and then it was just a matter of reaching out to the people and sending an email to someone that you know, or an organization, and they'll be like, of course we support this. Like they will, and we're honored to stand next to you. Like it wasn't like, even I didn't need to do a lot of phone calls, because people,
Wow.
the moment they saw March for Humanity sanctions, they're like, yes, we agree, like the government should do something. Why they did sanction Russia in a couple, I don't know exactly how long it took them to sanction Russia, but not as long. And there was no questions asked. It was straightforward. Meanwhile, when it comes to Gaza,
What were some of the groups that you were most excited to get endorsements from?
I'd say Greenpeace to begin with, because I wasn't sure that they will endorse it immediately. I thought like they will be kind of like, because they're big, they will be sitting on it and waiting until the very last minute, maybe endorse it on the day or the day after. That was one for the main ones, and probably the unions. Like it was really incredible to get the unions on board with this. Like it took a lot of work in the background to reach out to the right people and share the message. But once they get it, they're like, yes, we'll endorse this 100%. We'll share it with our newsletter, because it's not just about the unions here. It's about the unions in Palestine, the workers' rights there being violated. So like when you look at it, there is a lot of interconnection, and Palestine cause is not about one small issue. It's a lot of issues concentrated into one place, and everyone who does any sort of activism can agree that Palestine can agree on Palestine. Let's leave it at that. Um, so yeah, having the unions was really great. Greenpeace was a little bit of a surprise how quickly it happened, and probably one of the first organizations to endorse rather than the last ones. And the list is so big, like I
Yeah.
cannot remember. We had businesses, we had university clubs on the thing, and we actually have 25 individuals who endorsed as well. So we got a total of 185
Wow.
from memory. So, and it still keeps growing after the march. So we have 20 endorsements since then.
Wow. Yeah, why
Yeah.
not? Like, yeah, keep it open. Let's go. I think it's been really useful because, I mean, we've talked about how the media has tried to kind of downplay how many people came to the march. And now we've also seen some politicians doing what they often do, which is to try to frame things as radical or even, terrorists, or these types of words are thrown around. But, it makes it much more difficult when you've got all of these groups that have endorsed. So it's kind of like, oh, you think that the protesters were radicals? You think, oh, what, these Christian groups, the Quakers, Amnesty International, Oxfam, like all of us, what? It really, I think, lends a lot of legitimacy. And Bianca, you're probably the most experienced activist amongst us today. I wondered if you could share what you think the impacts of the day were.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the impact of it clearly was the amount of media coverage that it did get, and the strength of the spokespeople to be able to very clearly and effectively communicate around the demand of sanctions. I think it's really opened people's eyes to just how much support there was for Palestine, like the amount of people that turned out, and that there's also a lot of social license at the moment for that momentum to keep going. So there's a very powerful action that's happening down in Wellington, I believe, with the priests who are doing a sit-in at Nicola Willis's office, and they have directly linked what they're doing to as a follow-on to the March for Humanity. Just even in regard to the endorsements that are still continuing to come in, and we're getting people. I got an email just 5 minutes before I came on here of somebody wanting to be Kaiāwhina for the Auckland Harbour Bridge crossing. I had someone else contact me from out of town wanting to get their bus booked and wanting to know what the date is. And so that's a discussion that will be coming up, not whether or not we will be crossing the Auckland Harbour Bridge, but when we will be doing it. And I think that for 50,000 people to turn out with a change in plan very last minute to march down Queen Street over to Victoria Park sends a very clear signal to this government that when we do the Auckland Harbour Bridge, the number is going to be phenomenal. People are not willing to tolerate what they're witnessing anymore. They're not willing to allow this government to remain complicit in genocide and not prevent genocide and not punish genocide, but allow this country to keep on doing business and allow diplomatic and economic activities to continue in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with a terror state that is committing genocide in front of our eyes. So it is important that we keep on going, and the Harbour Bridge is deeply symbolic to Māori and the Māori protest movement. And of course, we had the 1975 Land March with Whina Kupa in 2004. We walked over the Harbour Bridge again for the hikoi for the foreshore and seabed, and then last year for the hikoi mo te tiriti in November 2024. And as Kaiāwhina, we got 30,000 people across that Harbour Bridge safely. So we've done it quite recently, and we are all trained and prepared to do it again. We have 140 Kaiāwhina that are committed and trained and marshalled on Saturday just gone. And for us, like when we start a hikoi like we did for the hikoi mo te tiriti, and we went up to Te Rerenga Wairua, and there's that karakia to start it, and then, you know, we carry that mauri across the whenua all the way down through to Pōneke, to the doorstep of Parliament, and that is about our connection to the whenua. It is about kaitiakitanga. It is about our whakapapa. And when we look at our Palestinian people, the Palestinian whānau here in Aotearoa, and the stories that they're telling us about the, you know, the different hikoi that they've done, whether it was the Nakba, you know, whether it was the march, was it the March of Return, and also the devastating images that we are seeing on our phones every day of people being constantly displaced in Gaza and walking miles and miles to try and avoid being sniped in efforts to get aid and to get food to take back for their families. So the connection between us and the story of hikoi and the story of marching for Palestinians, I think, is one that is inseparable in terms of our resistance and our resistance against settler colonial violence. And it was a real honor for us to be able to have those discussions within our own people, those that have been the movement leaders for us as tangata whenua, and that it is an appropriate course of action for us to do or to take, to be symbolic in the amount of people that walk over that harbour bridge. Because in this current moment, the genocide that we're seeing is, we've never seen something on this level in our lifetimes. And so really looking forward to the next steps ahead and to keeping the pressure on. And I believe that we have a responsibility to continue to mobilize people and continue to escalate in terms of the amount of numbers that are peacefully and safely demonstrating their right to, their democratic right to protest. And I do feel that this current government is shook after what we just did. The way that Simon Court has responded, saying that it was a terror dress-up event, and we had 50,000 people there. 2 women from Waiheke in their 80s that have never been to a protest in their lives came out for this. Another woman, a good friend of mine, also never been to a protest in her life, was there. You know, there were church leaders, there were union leaders, there were children, there were teachers, librarians, nurses. And to make that kind of a statement when we've been on the ground for 102 weeks in Tāmaki Makaurau, seeing these beautiful people turning out week in, week out, to be labelled in such a vicious and vile way, is completely unacceptable, in a way that the far right tries to discredit what is a growing and powerful and righteous and important movement that will achieve what we're set out to achieve, and that is to sanction Israel, or this government is out of here. This is the tide that is turning on this government. If you do not act on Gaza, and if you do not act on Palestine, and for the rights of tangata whenua here, we are the majority. With tangata tiriti, we are the majority, and you're starting to see that now with the numbers that were on Queen Street, and that's only going to continue to grow, and the Auckland Harbour Bridge is next.
Amazing. Yeah, you touched on so much there. One thing to pick up on is obviously the coming together of our movements. I think it's, in the past I would have talked about it as solidarity, I'm standing in solidarity with you over there and you're standing in solidarity with me over here, but our movements are really coming together and we're seeing those connections and the unity of the field in our movements going forward. Obviously last year with the Hikoi Mō Te Tiriti, when that happened, people were already very organized because they'd been protesting for many weeks for Palestine. So there was a lot of support for that movement that came out of the spaces where people had been organizing for Palestine. Obviously, Māori communities are already organized, but then you inject in the mobilizations for Palestine into that because the connections of these settler colonial projects had become more clear to people over time. And, I've seen so many people who maybe haven't thought about settler colonialism, haven't thought about their own places, tangata tiriti in Aotearoa, and then through understanding what's happening in Palestine, start to question like, oh, what's our place here? What's our history on these whenua? So there is this, I think, sharpening of clarity. I mean, there's also really jarring moments, when when we have movement or activists talking about illegal settlements elsewhere, and you're like, oh, how did you get get the land where you're living? Sometimes it has been like, those moments that are a little jarring, but yeah, overall, we've just seen more and more clarity over time. And so when we saw these marches take place across the Sydney Harbour Bridge and across Victoria Bridge in Brisbane, and there was this huge desire for that to happen here, it was only because of our established relationships, between Palestinian and Māori, between ourselves and Toitu Te Tiriti and Mana Whenua, that we were able to bring this together. Of course, we didn't actually march over the bridge, but we still have that there as an option for us if we don't get the sanctions that we're calling for. I know that there have been so many impacts from the march, and you've outlined a lot of them. I know Nadine and Omar and myself, when we all went back to work on Monday, we had lots of people coming up to us, and people who'd never spoken with us maybe about Palestine before were suddenly very aware of it and wanting to talk about it in the open. And so, yeah, there've just been so many great impacts from the march already. And then another thing you touched on, Bianca, was just the way in which the right is responding. So the way in which Zionists are responding to this, and the way in which the far right have responded. And what I think is quite interesting is that I feel as though we're reading the moment correctly when we say that the tide has shifted. The anti-genocide movement, the movement for Palestinian liberation has become popular and irresistible. And so what we've seen from people who oppose that movement is this turning towards whipping up white supremacy and anti-immigration sentiment. So instead of fighting the front on the terms of Palestine, they've actually shifted the goalpost and are starting to scapegoat migrants and Indigenous peoples as well. And Bianca, I don't know if you wanted to share anything about our recent experiences, because we took a trip over to Melbourne recently where some of these dynamics were very visible, and we've seen white supremacist marches in London as well at the moment. I'm not sure if you wanted to share anything about those experiences.
Yeah, sure. So we were over in Melbourne recently for an eco-socialist conference with some other Indigenous people. And the first thing that we did when we got there was we went to Camp Sovereignty, which is a First Nations Aboriginal land encampment in central Melbourne. And we had heard about the attack that was made on that camp by the Nazis following the March for Australia just a few days before we arrived there. And so we went up there just to offer koha, to check in with the people that were there. And we made some really strong connections while we were there, and particularly with the women that were assaulted by those Nazis when they stormed Camp Sovereignty. They weren't aware that the Nazis were coming. They charged up the hill. There was dozens and dozens of them, and at that point it was the Indigenous women, the First Nations women, that were in the camp, and they were brutally assaulted, ending in hospitalization. And so it was very upsetting to see them. They had been released from hospital, and to see the violence that they had been subjected to at the hands of these white supremacists. And the following day, I was able to join a community defense group in Melbourne on the front lines of the Palestine rally, and they had just come up against 2,000 Nazis the week before. So that's their marshalling group, their community defense group. And so we know that when capitalism is in crisis, that they double down and become more violent, and settler colonial violence starts to appear on the streets again, and is often a way to be able to deflect or to manufacture these violent kind of clashes or altercations that can also take place. And I do feel like it's a lot more emboldened in Australia, not necessarily the ideology, but in the way that they are currently taking to the streets. However, we must identify it on the streets here in Aotearoa, and we are seeing it in the form of Destiny Church, who are very much committed to the same ideology of the far right, and of fascism. And they have proven that they will also use violence against Kaiāwhina. They've assaulted 2 Kaiāwhina. They're going through a trial at the moment. And that was as a result of the Te Atatu Library incident. So I just, want to say that when we hear these comments, like what Simon Court said about the beautiful, powerful, March for Humanity that brought together people across all different aspects of our society, calling for an end to genocide, marching for humanity and for peace. The way that he responded was to respond with violence, in his words, against the people that attended. And it's an act of desperation, and it's an act to try and maintain some form of legitimacy or gain control of the narrative. And so when I hear people in privileged positions of power, speak out in that kind of a way, it reminds me of some of the violence that we see in other spaces that we are active in activism as well. So a lot of lessons that we learned from NAM, a lot in terms of how vulnerable they were up there at Camp Sovereignty, how incredibly dangerous and violent white supremacy is. And they are emboldened by politicians and by leaders and by things that are being said. And that will then play out in the streets. So those are warning shots for us here in Aotearoa, to take things very seriously and to never allow them to appear onto the streets unopposed as well. So incredible mahi by the defense team over in NAM, and we're thankful to them for the lessons that we learnt, and we're actually able to apply on Saturday for the March for Humanity to make it a beautiful, peaceful, and very safe march for everybody.
Awesome. And I know that from where Nadine and I were positioned in the march, we were towards the front of the march. Nadine was leading it, chanting, like her voice filling the streets of Auckland, as they do every week. And, the best feedback that we have for the Kaiāwhina team was that we didn't see anything. There was no disturbance. Everybody that we spoke to felt really, really safe at the march, which I think is really awesome. And I think having those experiences and learning from overseas enables us to be ready and prepared before the danger arises.
I think having those banners, to cover those Zyos, like they were just absolutely incredible. And like people were literally looking at them and laughing, like being like, you guys are ridiculous. Like, and if we're talking about numbers, like they had like what, 20, 10, 50,000. So if you want to talk about numbers, talk about numbers.
They were like standing at the front of the march. So there's like literally 50,000 people, right? We've got four, 5 rows of Kaiāwhina because we know that Destiny's down the road. And then I saw them and I was like, if they don't move, we're going to just completely smoke them. Like, we are going to go through there. There's so many people. But they did get pushed up into a side street and they had their flags and they were doing their thing. But we had these banners made which we have received so much feedback on. And so they say, nothing to see here, whānau, keep on moving, or Zionist here, keep on moving, whānau, and these different messages. And so what it did was, and we had a specific de-escalation training with a special wing of Kaiāwhina, which are our black vests, who are more advanced in de-escalation, and they have these banners to put up really quickly, these big 3 meter long banners, and we've got several of them. And it turned the whole thing into such a non-event because it was just, and people were, that they thought that the signs were great and kind of comical because it was like still, it was like making it clear what it's about, but also kind of making fun of them. And so instead of people just going straight into a point of anger and rage, which is completely valid when you come up against this bigotry and hate, it was like we maintain our integrity, we stay principled and disciplined about the beauty and importance of our kaupapa and our communities, and we just keep on moving because they don't deserve our time, they don't deserve our energy, they're attention seeking, they're desperate for some kind of legitimacy or media, and their only way to do that is to come out and be hateful. And so, yeah, so much awesome feedback about that response to Destiny, and we look forward to rolling it out again.
My favorite part of like my favorite video that came out of the protest was a video of Kaiāwhina people standing in line and singing the Zayos. Meow, 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 meow. Like, I cannot believe that I missed that. I didn't see it in real life, and I think like that's one of the things that a lot of people don't see is Kaiāwhina is there. They're protecting the people, but no one knows the level of detail or what happens in the background, and that's the best part. Like, we don't see it. We didn't know that this happens in the background. And as we always like to say, who keeps us safe?
We keep us safe. Thanks for that. So we've talked, I think, about the types of responses we might see on the streets. And we've already seen some marches advertised that these white supremacist anti-immigration marches have already been advertised here. But there's also then the narrative war. And Kyle, I don't know if you want to jump in at all. When we were talking about how amazing the march was and how there were even, these different unions, blah, blah, blah. I was like, Kyle, there was even journalists. We had journalists marching with us. You'd be shocked to know that. I don't know if you wanted to talk at all about some of what you've seen in the media landscape leading up to and after the march.
Yeah, there are a couple of things which were really obvious to me, even in the first couple of weeks coming up to it, as the event was being advertised, right? The first was that, you talked about Simon Court's response after the march and the kind of defamatory and violent language he was using. That was going for a couple of weeks beforehand, but wasn't really getting much coverage. There was definitely like a coordinated right wing, far right, I guess you'd say, PR campaign to try and put pressure on politicians and community groups not to be associated with this. I think right from day one, they knew exactly how much of a threat this was going to be, even if the numbers hadn't been as large as they ended up being. And even without the March over the Harbour Bridge, right, they're going to be incredibly scared of a repeat that goes over the Harbour Bridge and turns out a bigger number. And I think in part that's what the response from some of those more vocal pro-genocide politicians and media folks has been about. Really funny thing on the day was, I think, one of the first articles I saw about it, because I was just checking the news and seeing how the coverage was going, right? Because you want to be like, okay, what do they think the numbers are? And it was one from Stuff where they said hundreds turn up to Aotea Square. And I was like standing in Victoria Park. This was
Oh dear.
because I met the march from the park. And I see always people marching in. I was waiting for like minutes and minutes, and I was like, it's not stopping. Like, I mean, I guess hundreds is technically correct. But
Hundreds of hundreds, maybe?
yeah, exactly. And just how quickly that narrative had to change so that they didn't look,
Yeah.
they didn't completely delegitimize themselves as a news outlet. The other thing which I think is really useful to take into account in terms of public sentiment is, you've mentioned about the turnout goes up and down week to week with the weekly marches. Those have got pretty high, but sometimes they can be quite low as well. And having everything in one place, most journalists know, right? Most journalists know that there's good support for this. Most politicians know. There was a poll done, I think, in November of 2023, where I think something over 70% of people said there needed to be a ceasefire. Right. That's a long time ago. That has only increased. We're now getting into a situation where it is people are supporting stronger terms, like much, much stronger terms at a higher rate as well. And there's some polling out of RNZ and Reed Research that I've seen where it was saying that even for the National Party, more people within the party, I think 29 to 28%, believe that the government should recognize a Palestinian state. That's not the be all and the end all, right? Like, that's not like the only thing that we should want. But I think it's a really clear indication. And something like 48% put down that they don't know. That was, I think, polling done from April for a couple of months. That was before this March happened, right? It would be really like there's a lot of pressure still to apply there. And I think politicians know that, media knows that, and a lot of this response is because they actually have those numbers. They know the support is strong, and they know that they are quickly being delegitimized, and that people see that kind of number, that kind of turnout, see some of those incredible aerial images with that really, there's a really good one that's been going around with Instagram, with some really fantastic music, that's kind of zooming over Queen Street, and you're seeing this huge number of people. People see that and go like, far out, I want to be at the next one, right? Like I want to be there showing my support because I believe this too. And then knowing it went off without a hitch as well. Like there was no serious pushback. Like, wow, we are the majority. All the noise that's been made by media, by politicians to say we're in the minority, here's the physical proof that that's not real.
Yeah. We completely blew that out of the water, particularly when the drone footage came out. And yeah, I think just maybe touching on the Palestinian statehood as well, I do feel that that is such a huge distraction and being used by this government as a way to try and show that they're doing something about Palestine while they and ah if Palestine has the right to exist is absolutely disgraceful. And the public is seeing through that. Winston Peters is heading off to the United Nations next week. Recognizing the statehood of Palestine is an absolute bare minimum. They need to sanction Israel, diplomatic and economic sanctions against Israel for its war crimes, for committing genocide, for forced starvation. I mean, the list goes on. It's the United Nations has just come out today accusing Israel of committing genocide. So I think it is very clear that both Labour and National have failed on this issue. Deeply failed. I only heard Chris Hipkins say the word genocide maybe 2 weeks ago. Unfolding genocide. It appeared after Helen Clark maybe gave him the words that he needed to say once she started saying it. I'm not sure. But the response, for there to be 25% support of National Party MPs for the recognition of the statehood of Palestine is an absolute disgrace. And so is the silence that has come from the opposition. So what choice does that leave us with as the people? But to rise up and to unite, whether it's unions, NGOs, tangata whenua, Palestinians, migrant communities, I mean, the numbers will grow. They will be exponential when we cross the Auckland Harbour Bridge. And at the moment, I have to be really honest, there is no really clear communication coming out of either of the main political parties of this country, and an incredible disappointment of where we've come from. Where we have had a history of standing up for human rights, for peace, for an independent foreign policy. And the move away from that has been completely unchallenged, in my opinion, from a party who was founded on being anti-war and for workers. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to respond a little bit to those numbers. And while sure, that might be great, and maybe they've changed over the course of the weekend because there is clearly a social license and it's only going to grow as we continue to build this movement. Yeah, what we're seeing is an absolute disgrace and will be remembered for generations, the way that this government, those in power and those those in opposition, it's just moved so far away from what the majority of people in this country actually think is important. And that is that we don't allow any support for a nation committing a genocide.
Yeah, I think those numbers, and the numbers that turned out, it's so important to think about how much the stuff's been suppressed, like actively, by politicians and media as well. And it's despite that, and despite the lies being told about people, that we're getting movement on it, right?
Yeah, for sure. We heard mentioned in the last couple of comments there talk of ceasefires and recognition of Palestinian statehood. And these are demands that people have been making for a long time, for good reason. But then, of course, we're seeing our government, sign letters indicating that, yes, we'll recognize Palestine if all of these conditions are met, and the conditions amount to, you know, a capitulation of giving up, of allowing Israel essentially to carry on with the genocide and no actual pathway towards real self-determination for Palestinian people. And then with the ceasefire demand, I mean, how do you negotiate a ceasefire with a state that's going to bomb your negotiators? They've just not provided a pathway where that's legitimate. And so the only thing that we have left to use is our power to punish, through sanctions. And unilateral sanctions is not something I would genuinely generally support. It's better if countries can come together through the UN and do these types of things in a multilateral way. But when you see that the UN is failing to prevent a genocide, it is up to states like New Zealand to do what they can. So because of those reasons, we had one demand for the march, and that was sanctions, and we were clear about it. We know Winston Peters is off to the UN General Assembly soon, and what we do next will depend on what he announces there. But we are continuing to organize. Nadine, is there anything you would like to say about what you're hoping to see happen next?
Yeah, I mean, we will see what happens after Winston Peters goes to the US and whether they recognize Palestine as a state. But I mean, as Bianca mentioned, that is a distraction. And, while we were doing media and, we were talking to journalists, so a lot of the questions they were asking us was, New Zealand is a small country. Like, like we care about what happens in our backyard. Like, what do you say about that? And, I think New Zealand has a proud history on standing on the right side of history. And yes, we are a small country, but we are also a mighty country, and we do want to look back at our history in Aotearoa and say, yes, we did something when there was a genocide happening in Gaza. Yes, we did something when there was a man-made famine happening in Gaza. We acted on it. The people demanded sanctions, because 2 years down the line, words are not enough. It's time for action. And the most appropriate action right now is to sanction Israel for its war crimes. It's a rogue state. As you mentioned, Arama, they've bombed their negotiators. They've bombed the Freedom Flotilla in the middle of the ocean in Tunisia. They've bombed Lebanon. They've bombed Syria. Why isn't anyone holding them accountable? Why are we just giving them a slap on the wrist and they're going on about bombing schools and hospitals? Why is it that a 5-year-old girl that gets shot 355 times by an IDF soldier and no one blinks an eye? Why is that okay? Why have we normalized this for the Palestinian people? It's dehumanizing us as Palestinian. So we deserve justice. We deserve our freedom. And that's why we've been marching for the past 102 weeks. I kind of forgot what my weekends look like without these protests. Like I feel like now my weekends are around these protests. So yeah, the most appropriate action right now is to sanction Israel for its war crimes. I mean, just like we mentioned, there is kind of like there is a shift, in the movement and journalists as well, and the questions they ask, because very early on in the genocide, there was a lot of October 7th questions, whereas now you can't play that card anymore. 2 years down the line of this genocide, of us watching this man-made famine, no food has entered Gaza since August. There are still children that are being starved to death. We've seen their bones through our screens. It's 2025. Social media is a big thing in our generation, and we've seen everything. We've seen the images of little kids holding their parents in plastic bags, holding their organs. Why have we normalized this as people? So it is time for us to do something, and that is coming in the masses, and that's us mobilizing, and that's us closing down the streets week in and week out, and that is to have these big actions, and it doesn't get bigger than marching on the Harbor Bridge. So it will happen. It won't happen next week, but it will happen at some point. And we
Yeah.
call on everyone to join us. Come and join us.
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, the government could deliver meaningful sanctions, in which case we could all maybe go on a holiday somewhere, read a book, watch Netflix. I'd be perfectly happy to do that. But yeah, we're certainly having to be prepared to march over the Harbour Bridge, given what we know of this government and how they've behaved in the past. We're wanting to make sure that we're prepared to do that, if there's no meaningful action taken after the UN General Assembly meeting. Is there anything other people want to add at this point before I pass over to Kyle to start wrapping us up?
I had a
Okay.
quick question for everyone, just around impact and future actions, I guess. You mentioned the way in which both Labour and National have failed, right? The two major parties, National as the government has not taken the necessary action, like the required moral and legal action that it should be to stop the genocide. And Labour has not been putting pressure on them to do so either. It has played with definitions, it's used semantics, has tried everything it can to avoid it. Is there a thought of turning this into an election issue? And how would that conceivably be done under the current conditions? Even as we are starting to see media and politicians be forced to talk about this more.
I mean, I already see it as an election issue. I see, being out on the streets and particularly being with Kaiāwhina and supporting protests. It's just unreal how many. I mean, this weekend we've got the pay equity. We've just come from March for Nature, and now we're going to be supporting the pay equity march where 350,000 workers, have had pay equity gutted. And so that's nurses, teachers, early childhood teachers, librarians. So it's not just around Palestine, like with national. Like if you're Maori, if you're a woman, if you're a worker, if you're anyone who cares about humanity and are not pro-genocide, if you want to see the end to a genocide, then there are just so many things mounting up against this government, and they must just be so completely out of touch with the reality. And the amount of people that took to the street for Palestine and Tamaki Makaurau last Saturday must have seriously really given them reason to be concerned, because we can't wait any longer. Winston Peters heading off to the United Nations, and if all he goes with is recognizing the state of Palestine as a bare minimum, the people will not accept that. And we have no choice but to keep on growing this movement and organizing and mobilizing for twice as many people to take to the Auckland Harbour Bridge, to take to the streets, to put the pressure on. This is why we have the ability, the democratic right to protest, to hold our leaders to account. And the amount of people that are deeply unhappy with what is happening and the way that things are impacting their lives. And the silence on this issue of Palestine is intolerable. People cannot tolerate it any longer. And the other thing that is equally concerning is we've had the FBI, we know they've been here for years, but they've just had an office officially set up in Wellington. What Judith Collins came out and said that our troops should be preparing, training, getting prepared to go to war. And then I heard that the New Zealand Defence Force was considering allowing US troops to train on our soil. And then we've got these decisions around AUKUS. And then we've got Labour, who seem to be completely silent on all of these issues. It's mind-blowing. But when you add all of those pieces together, you're like, of course National and the coalition government aren't holding Israel to account, because that actually completely goes against the foreign policy that they're trying to line up for this country. So I think in this current political moment, people connecting the dots between everyone who is being impacted, but also what this current government, and I believe, is a neoliberal agenda that is seeking to continue to keep the boot on the neck of the marginalised, of the oppressed, of Indigenous, of tangata whenua, of workers, moving away from universal healthcare, moving away from the things that I grew up with in my lifetime, even around the importance of maintaining an independent foreign policy or a nuclear-free Pacific, is just so quickly disappearing, and it doesn't feel like there's any team playing defense. So my message is to both major parties is that this is really going to be a really critical election, and I think we're going to see a huge mobilization of people, and Palestine is the most, I believe, is the absolute critical movement of our time here in Aotearoa for so many reasons. And Nadine and Omar touched on it earlier. There's so many things that connect us to what's happening in Gaza and what's happening to Palestine. So yeah, last Saturday was a warning. Sanction Israel now. Otherwise, we will continue to organize, and we are going to mobilize more and more people until Israel is sanctioned and until this government starts to stand on the right side of history and stand for basic human rights, which is that you have the right to be alive and not genocided by the terrorist state of Israel.
Mic drop.
I thought I'd better go on mute, otherwise it's going to keep I really go on about those guys.
Mic drop. I think Bianca ended it perfectly for us. Palestine will be free.
Fantastic. Hey, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. It's been a real pleasure and honor to have you all on to go over the events of Saturday and the March for Humanity and doing what we can to ensure that Palestine will be free. If people want to get connected, if they want to be part of future actions, if they want to get on the Harbour Bridge, Omar, Nadine, where can people find ways to connect with you online?
The easiest way would be to use our Instagram page, Aotearoaforpal, or we also have a Facebook page and a TikTok account for now, as well as we are building a database using a petition that you can find on our bio on Instagram. So if you click in there, there's a Linktree link that has like all the different things, endorsements, volunteering, which should be closed now, or not closed, we should reopen it, and as well as the petition. So if you go to the petition and sign it, we'll have your details, and we can send an email once we confirm a date with details and further information. And also we have our email address, marchforhumanity at Proton .co.nz, I think. Let me check.
.me, I think.
Yeah,
.me.
Proton.
Yeah, Proton.
Is it a number 4 or FOR?
FOR.
So March FOR
For-
humanity at
Yep.
proton.me. Cool.
And if people want to volunteer with Kaiāwhina, if you want to become a marshal or become trained in de-escalation as we come up against these far-right counter stuntmen, then please join us, Kaiāwhina Aotearoa@gmail.com, or otherwise you can also find us on Instagram. And we have 140 people trained for the Harbour Bridge already, but we will be continuing to recruit and to train and come together as a rōpū now that we have more of a lead-in time to the Harbour Bridge crossing, which will be announced through the Aotearoa for Palestine social media. I see that while we've been on this call, I believe that date hasn't been announced, but it has been shared that the date is coming soon. So please, everybody, bring your whānau, bring your children, bring your grandparents, bring everyone you know. This is our moment to be on the right side of history as a country and to make sure that our values and what we care about and the human rights of Palestinians and the lives of Palestinian children, mothers, fathers, and grandparents are just as important as ours. So look out for the date. Aotearoa for Palestine.
I'll chuck some links in the summary as well for people to find those. So you should just be able to click one of those and find all the information that you need. Thank you again, everybody. It's been really good to have a chat about it. Thank you to our audience for listening. Always really happy to have you here with us, sharing the information that is coming out through the podcast. If you want to get on board, would love to have you joining the activist groups as well, because that organizing is really, really key. So share this with your friends and family. Let them know there is a lot to celebrate, that we are moving forward, that the movement is growing. And if they want to be on the winning side, maybe time to take those first steps, like those 2 80-year-old women from Waiheke showing up to their first protest on the weekend. That's been another episode of 1 of 200. We'll catch you on the weekend for Kaiāwhina.
If artifice is art, then I'm living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paved with good intentions, and I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they quote this as a cost we ought to stay. I live amongst the people every day in this vindictive, forgetful fucking race.